Welcome to the Handi Quilter educational webinar today. We are excited to be with you. We're also excited to teach you some basics of long arm quilting. I am Vicki Hoth, and I'm the education coordinator for Handi Quilter. I'm here in Salt Lake with Mindy Powell, who is one of our studio educators. We teach the retreats here and help with education. We're excited for this opportunity, and let's just get started. Mindy, what do we want to teach them first today?
Well, the basics of quilting are making sure that your table height is adjusted properly. And so the first thing you're going to want to do is stand with your arms at a 90-degree angle in front of your table and make sure that your hands can easily grasp onto the machine handles. And you should have approximately 3 inches from your elbow to the pole.
You know, that is so important because if the table is not the right height, you know, the fatigue in your body can really take a toll on you. And we love to quilt, so we don't want to quit.
That's right. Okay, so we actually have 3 tables that we're going to go through on adjusting the table height. The first is the HQ adjustable table, and you're going to want to have a partner to help you on adjusting this table. Because one person is going to take the weight off the table by lifting it up, and the second person is going to kneel down beside the table and squeeze the adjustment knobs together. And then the person holding onto the table will raise it or lower it.
Nice manicure, huh?
That is a nice manicure, that's right. Okay, the second table is the HQ QuilTable. And we recommend when you're first putting this table together to place the tabletop on the floor with the legs pointing up, and then make your adjustments to the legs by setting the lower leg insert at the desired height and bolting it into place. And you can kind of see with the cursor where the bolts are.
So this table, I have found that it's kind of hard sometimes to know the height when it's upside down, you know, because your machine's not on it. So you can put those bolts in and put the inserts in the legs, and then after have a helper, and you can actually do another adjustment on those. Take those bolts out one at a time and shift those up.
Great, thanks, Vicki. Okay, our third frame is our studio frame. And to raise this frame, it's fairly easy. You can do it yourself by putting your foot on the bar at the bottom and just lift the frame up. To lower the frame, you might want to have another person come and help you release the latch while you slowly lower it to the desired height. It is important to remember when you are adjusting this height of this frame that you should adjust your center supports first and then the outer legs.
Yeah, I found that if you lower you can't lower your center legs until you've lowered your outside legs.
Right. Okay, the next basic that we're going to go over is leveling the table. And the most important thing to remember is if it's not level, you'll be fighting and chasing your machine the whole time. So instead of going to your garage and getting your leveler, you can just use your machine to level your table. Place your machine on your frame and then slide it back and forth and let go of the machine to see if it moves forward or back or to one side or the other. And then when you're going to level the HQ adjustable table, you need to slightly lift one end of the table and turn the leveling feet to adjust it up or down. You can also do this by yourself with your foot by gently rotating the leveler with your foot clockwise to raise it and counterclockwise to lower it.
Yeah, this can be a one-man job just by lifting it. I do that all the time with my foot, so it works.
Exactly. With the HQ QuilTable, you're going to need to use the wrenches that come with your table to adjust the leveling feet. If you don't have those wrenches close by, a pair of channel lock pliers will work as well.
So where do I want to just show you right here. This wrench is going to go in under here. There is a big nut that you'll use to turn, and that will raise it up into the leg or lower it.
Great, thanks, Vicki. When you're adjusting or leveling the HQ Studio frame, you'll also need to use the provided wrench, and you'll also see where the cursor is placed and the wrench is. That's where you're going to make the adjustment on the nut and lower or raise the leveler.
The same thing as with the QuilTable. Very same thing. You turn that and it will raise it or lower the frame.
Okay, the next basic we're going to talk about is the leaders, and our HQ leaders are made from firmly woven sturdy twill cotton fabric, and they have the Velcro tape so that you can take them off the pole, and you can also put them back on when you need to. The advantages of our HQ leaders are you can actually take them off and pin them while you're sitting down or machine base them, and they are marked for easy centering and positioning.
So in our retreats, one of the things that I really see, Mindy, is that sometimes the quilters forget that idler pole, that pole that helps level the quilt, and they think that they have to unpin the fabric from the leader and take it off, and so that they enclose that idler pole. The nice thing about the Velcro leaders is they can just unvelcro it, take it under, and bring it back up to the take-up pole. The other thing that I know a lot of quilters like to do is they like to sit at the TV and pin. And so, like you say, take that off and go pin or baste it on. I have a friend that actually has purchased quite a few sets of these leaders, and she preloads quilts. They're hanging in the closet, ready to go, and so she has extra sets. They're all basted on, and then the Velcro, you know, she just Velcros it back onto the poles. So it's really nice to have those extra sets. And if you ever cut those leaders because you maybe put your frame at a different size, then, you know, those extra sets help too.
That's right. Okay, so when you're attaching the leaders, we actually have quite a few people in our retreats that ask how they are supposed to be attached. So the first thing you want to do is mark your pole centers and your leaders with permanent marker, just a mark, and then when you're placing them on and taking them off the poles, you will already have your mark there, and you don't have to do that over and over. When you're placing your leaders on the backing pole and the quilt top pole, they should both be waterfalling into the center, as you see here with the arrows.
So, Mindy, one of the things that we used to rent time on our machines here in the studio, and one of the biggest issues that the quilters had was they didn't know if they ever got the leaders on correctly onto their fabric. And we do recommend them putting them this way, but because if they don't put them on this way, they still load their fabric the right way on the frame. As long as the latch is down when they're turning it, it doesn't matter how they put them on, which side of the print is up or down. So sometimes we overanalyze it, and it doesn't matter. Just make sure the latch is down.
Great, thanks, Vicki. So you'll place your final leader on the take-up pole with the markings facing the back of the frame. You can see the arrow and how the fabric leader is actually winding over the top of the bar going down. We actually have a couple different sizes of leaders. The 9.5 foot HQ leader set fits the adjustable table and the QuilTable, and it comes with all three leaders for all three of your bars. And then the 11 foot HQ leader set fits the HQ Studio frame. That also comes with the three leaders, and you can actually use the HQ 11 foot leader set on any of the frames. You just will want to cut it down and serge the ends. You can also do the same thing with our super leaders, and our super leaders are nice because they are actually a 27-inch. So it's especially nice for your fusion take-up pole. You can actually bring that out to you so you don't have to go around to the back of the machine to pin on your fabric.
I'm just looking at some questions here about the leaders. Can I use the new marked leaders on my HQ16 that I bought 3 years ago? Yes, you can. They all fit. And do you pin the take-up leader from the front or the back? I like to pin it from the front. I don't ever like to go to the back of my machine. Anyway, I just don't like to go to the back of my machine. Some quilters do, and that's a personal preference. A lot of people think that the leaders they're not big enough. That's why the super leader is so nice, that you can bring that super leader up to the front and pin from the front. One of the biggest reasons I like to pin from the front is I can see my pins. None of my pins are buried underneath the seam of where you pinned. I get to see that, and that's also kind of a guide for when I place my batting and my top up to the top when I'm putting it on.
And we have a few other questions I can see coming on about the pins, and we will actually go over those in just a few minutes.
One of the other things, I'm just reading here, sorry, we're just trying to read and keep up with this. When measuring your poles, from what point do you measure? When I place my measuring tape, I take a metal measuring tape and I place that little metal clip that's on the end of it that hangs onto the side arm, and I move that all the way over to the other side, which should be about 144 inches, I think. Mine's a 12-foot frame. And then I find the center pole. With a 12-foot frame, there's 3 4-foot poles. The center pole, find the center and place, and I put an arrow from where the Velcro is, just kind of draw it down, and then I take that leader, fold it in half, and then I find the closest line that's the halfway line.
Okay, so let's move on to pinning the leaders. So we actually had a question, does it matter what kind of pins you use to pin the quilts to the leaders? Our preference, of course, is our HQ long arm pins because they're nice and long. They're 2 inches in length with pearl heads that are easy on the fingers. They're very strong and not susceptible to bending. There are 144 pins in each box, and we always encourage people to buy 2 boxes because you can use them for other projects. Okay, so we're going to move on to loading the quilt sandwich. We actually have quite a few retreat people come in and they're not quite sure how to do this, so let's go over this basic. The first thing you're going to want to do is drape your backing fabric over your poles. That way you can visualize your quilt sandwich. So your backing fabric should face the floor. And then you're going to, you've already marked the center of your backing fabric, and you're going to place the center on the center mark of your leaders where you've already marked that. Place your pins end to point and take big bites with the pins, except for the end. You should weave the end pins through your fabric and your leader, and that will make them more stable. So next you're going to roll the fabric completely onto the pole. The nice thing about draping your backing fabric over all your poles is that it also gives you a little tension on the material. So you're going to make sure that your latch is engaged and start rolling your fabric up and massage your fabric or smooth your fabric as you roll it. That way you're not going to get bunching of the fabric.
We always tell the quilters here, if they can hear the clicking of the ratchet, they know they're rolling the right way.
Yes. Okay, next you're going to do the same with your quilt top fabric. You're going to drape that over the poles so that you can visualize your top. It should be facing the ceiling. Roll your fabric just like you did. Make sure your latch is engaged and roll it just like you did with your backing, and make sure to massage it every few turns.
What do you mean by massage, Mindy?
I mean smoothing out the wrinkles between the leaders and the fabric.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, the next thing you're going to do is attach the other end of your backing fabric to your take-up leader. Sometimes people get confused and attach the other end of their top fabric, but it should be the backing fabric. And make sure to get the leader around the idler pole so that you don't have to unvelcro your leader. So you can kind of notice we have on our screen there, can you tell what is wrong with this photo? We forgot to load the top fabric before we took this photo.
That's what you get for cheap help. No.
Okay, the next thing that you will do after you've brought up your top fabric, you're going to place your batting between your backing and your quilt top poles and move it to the top of your backing fabric. Kind of line it up with the pins.
And you notice we don't have any batting here, but this is where you would put it. This is where the cursor is, and just slide it. Some people like to put their batting in here and with the top fabric pull them up together. I actually like to lift this pole off on one end and just slide it up, and then I slide my batting up so it gives it a full, easy pull without having the tension of the top fabric. So some people would prefer to do that way.
Okay, Vicki, I actually see a question. It says, why do you load the one side of the back, then the top, then the rest of the back? And we actually do this because it helps us to remember that lower bar where we load our backing fabric, we call it the belly bar. And that's the one we do first, and then we do the top because it comes next. It's close to the belly bar. And then we do the take-up roller. That's right, thanks. Next, because it's the furthest away. It's more than anything done in a sequence to help us remember. And so I guess if this person listening to the webinar has a different way to do it that they can remember, that's fine, but this is the way we do it here at Handi Quilter.
That's a good way, too.
That's a good way. The next thing we are going to do is show you that you need to baste your batting down to your backing fabric. We do this so that your batting's not moving all over when you're doing your quilting, and also we recommend that you use the channel locks to do this because it will give you a kind of a plumb line as you're doing it so that you can bring your top fabric up to that line and have it square. So we recommend that you use 2 channel locks. We say here at the studio 1 is good, but 2 is better. So you're going to have more stability if you use 2. And you can place the channel locks on the 2 side wheels or the 2 front wheels. It's a personal preference. Just place those channel locks on once you've placed your machine where you want to start your line of basting stitching. And then once you have those channel locks placed on, go ahead and stitch your line across the top of the batting.
So why is it important to have a square quilt? I mean, is that what we're doing here, is squaring up this quilt?
That's exactly right. It's important because if you don't square up your quilt, you're going to have bunching in certain places and feathering of the quilt and on the edges.
You mean if I don't start square at the beginning, I don't end square?
Exactly.
Oh, good idea.
Okay, so once you've basted your quilt sandwich, once you've basted your batting to your backing fabric, you're going to bring up your quilt top to your line that you basted, and then you're going to baste your whole quilt sandwich together. Let's see. So when you're starting your line of quilting, move the machine needle to the starting point. And we actually have quite a few people that don't really understand how to start your line of quilting. So this is the basic that we are going to cover in this webinar.
How to bring up that bobbin thread. I see that so many times in our retreats that there's a lot of bobbin thread on the back of the quilt, and they say, oh, I'll just trim it afterwards. But if we get that into a good habit of bringing up that bobbin thread at the beginning, things look a lot better on our quilts.
That's right. So once you've placed your machine where you want it, and you press the needle down and then press it up, holding on to the top thread, and that will bring up, and move your machine aside, and that will bring up the bobbin thread so you can grab onto it and pull it out so that it's a little bit longer. And then you can grab onto both of those, both the bobbin and the top thread, and move your machine back to the beginning and take small tacking stitches to lock the threads. Now this is something that I think a lot of people don't understand. When you're bringing up your bobbin thread, it's not locking your stitch in place, so a lot of people forget about the tacking stitches and end up finding their line of stitching unraveling down the road. Okay, then you're going to do your quilt. You're going to quilt as desired. Now at the end of the line of quilting, you're going to do the opposite. You're going to take your small tacking stitches, and then you're going to move your machine to the side a few inches and loop that thread around one of your fingers and move it back to your line of stitching. Then you're going to take your needle up, down, while you're holding on to that line of stitching, and pull up your bobbin thread. Once you've pulled up your bobbin thread, you can clip the threads at the surface of the fabric. Now a lot of people who do show quilts will want to keep those threads a little bit longer, and that way they can go back at the end and bury their threads.
Very good. One of the questions that come up is on your basting, as you baste across the top, what happens if you're basting a high loft batting, and how do you do that so that you can get that square line across, square up your quilt? And the only thing, because I know your hopping foot gets caught in that, the only thing that I have found that really works is I could take a narrow strip of fabric and put along there so that it's actually running over the narrow strip of fabric, and that's still giving me my square up line, and then I can just lift that fabric and use that as a line. And then go ahead and stitch your top on. The other question is, what is a basting stitch, or how long should a basting stitch be? A basting stitch is 4 to 8 inches or stitches per inch, I would say. The one thing I have found is I usually don't go into basting because I forget to take it out of basting. And I start quilting and it's 4 inches instead of my 10 or 12. So I never change it out of my 10 or 12 stitches per inch, so that I never have to worry about having those long stitches. But I also make sure that I stay within that 1/4 inch of the batting or of the binding area.
Okay, so let's move on. Okay, we're going to talk about the different stitching modes that we have. When you're quilting in manual mode, the quilter you are in complete control of your stitch length. So you're going to set your machine speed at a certain percentage, and then you'll move the machine, and the faster the machine is moved, the longer stitches you'll get. So here's a screen view of our HQ18 Avante, and you can see that we have our regulated and then our manual right under there.
And this is actually in the manual mode because you can see it indicates that right here, and it's saying that it's 86% of the maximum speed. So this is going pretty fast if you were to start stitching.
Right, and for most people I would recommend they start at about 50% and then move up and down accordingly. So when you're quilting in regulated mode, you set the desired stitch length, and then once you move the machine will regulate your stitch length to that desired stitch length.
So again, this is in regulated, and you press up and down here to get your stitches per inch.
Okay, let's go over the 2 modes of stitch regulation, Precision and Cruise, for the HQ18 Avante and the HQ24 Fusion. So with Cruise stitch regulation, when you turn on your machine, the needle will start to cycle up and down at the cruise speed set by you, And then the lower the cruise speed, the slower the needle cycles. As you move your machine, the stitch regulation will regulate your stitches and keep them at the same length. When you stop your machine, the needle will continue to cycle until it is turned off. With the precision stitch regulation, you'll turn on your machine, but the needle will not fully cycle until you move your machine. As you continue to move the machine, the stitch regulation will regulate the stitches and keep them at the same length. And then when you stop moving the machine, the needle stops at whatever point in the cycle it happens to be, up or down. So you might ask, when do you want to use precision? And a lot of people, it's personal preference, but when you use rulers or templates, that would be a good time to use precision, because you'll be stopping to move your ruler every so often, and then you can get your exact point. Other people like to use precision when you're doing edge-to-edge quilting, such as with pantographs or groovy boards. Some people like to use the cruise mode when you're doing micro-quilting, or if, like in this example, you're going over the edge of the feather and you want to have kind of a slow mode, but you want to make sure you're getting each of those curves. And then some people actually like to use the cruise mode when they're doing the edge-to-edge and groovy boards. So, you know, that's a personal preference.
And that's the nice thing about quilting, is everybody has their personal preference, and it doesn't mean that one person is wrong and one person is right. It is your personal preference. I personally really love cruise, and I have my cruise set. I have a fusion, and I have my cruise set between 3 and 5 all the time, even when I do rulers. When I do rulers, I do slow it down to about 3, but I really like the cruise. Other people are sold and totally love the precision. So that's the nice thing. We get to be the queen of our quilts.
That's right. And I was just noticing a question. It says, in which situations would you use manual instead of regulated? It seems as a new quilter you'd always use regulated. And a lot of the new quilters are more comfortable using regulated. And as they become more efficient and proficient in their quilting, they tend to go over to the manual then, because they can regulate their stitches themselves in manual.
That's right.
Okay, so what factors should I consider when setting my stitch length in stitch regulation? The size of the design. So the smaller the design, the shorter the stitches are going to be in order to get the desired detail. So if the stitches are too long, curves won't be smooth. You'll see that if you do tiny little loops. Your loops will kind of tend to look boxy instead. So the thickness of the thread, when you use longer stitches with heavier threads. Number 3 is, are you basting or quilting? Good basting stitch length is 4 stitches per inch. And then if you're stitching in the ditch, shorter stitches bury better in the ditch, so you'll want to set it at about 12 to 14 stitches per inch.
And if you ever want to baste a quilt for someone that is doing a hand quilting, you can use the machine. You can load it on and baste across by using the stitches per inch, or actually putting it in manual at a slow speed and moving the machine fast.
Great, thanks for that tip. So, is it possible to outrun the stitch regulation? Yes, on any machine it is possible. If you move the machine faster than the top speed that your machine can provide, the stitches will become longer, and this is true of all the machines.
Okay, I want to make a point here that we see at retreat, and we get phone calls about. People will call in and they'll say, I have my machine set at 12 stitches per inch and 55% of my speed. And a lot of times people think that they have to have both of those set, and you don't. Stitches per inch is your stitches per inch. That's how many stitches you're going to get in 1 inch, so you'll set that. If you want to set it in manual at a 50%, that is your needle strikes per minute. So until you turn on the cruise and then start adding them both together, you've either got regulated or manual.
Great, thanks, Vicki. And
Does that make sense?
It did to me. I also wanted to address one more question that was asking about basting the sides of the quilt. And yes, we do recommend you baste the sides of the quilt always. And we didn't put that in the webinar, so thank you to that webinar person for bringing that up.
So do I baste the whole quilt at one time, or how do I do that?
You can just baste it as you go.
So chunk it down as I go.
Yep. Okay, what advice do HQ Studio educators give our retreat students over and over again? Slow down. Keep yourself in control of both the design and the stitch length by slowing down. It's not a race. You're already quilting much faster than you can by hand, so just keep doing your thing, but be slow. So what is the stitching capacity of your HQ machine? Your HQ16 machine can do 1,500 stitches per minute in manual mode and 4 to 15 stitches per inch in regulated mode. The HQ18 Avante will stitch 1,800 stitches per minute in in manual mode and 4 to 18 stitches per inch in regulated mode. Your HQ24 Fusion will stitch 2,200 stitches per minute in manual mode and 4 to 24 stitches per inch in regulated mode.
One of the questions that I'm seeing is, what does the percentage mean in cruise? When we're in regulated, you are getting whatever you set your stitches per inch. When you add the cruise to it, what that means is I can turn on the machine, and if I have it set at 3% on the Fusion, it's going to be, or an Avante, it's going to be a very slow percentage of the actual speed, which, say the Fusion is 2,200, 3% of 2,200 is very slow, just cruising. But when you start moving the machine it goes into regulated, I mean, it is into regulated, and it makes the stitches that 12 or 10 stitches per inch. If I were to move the the cruise up to 20% and then just turn on the machine in regulated, you will see that it has a faster revolution moving of those stitches moving. And so why would I ever move it up to 20 in regulation? Some people would do that when they're doing micro-quilting. And so that if they don't want to go into manual mode, they'll put their cruise up to a high cruise like 20 to 25 and then put it in maybe 18 stitches per inch, and it'll keep cruising so you don't maybe get as much of that surging of the machine in regulation when you're doing micro-quilting. So I would recommend that those that have the cruise, that you play with that and turn it on to, say, a 3%, and play with it, and then move it up to a 10, 15, 20, and just see how the difference while you're quilting, how that works.
Great, thanks, Vicki. That was wonderful information. And I just wanted to mention, because there were quite a few questions about burying threads, and I think that we will have to cover that in a different webinar.
I think so. That would be a good one.
So moving on, what is the stitching capacity of the HQ Suite 16, 1,500 stitches per minute, and also the HQ 16 sit down is 1,500 stitches per minute.
Now we're into micro handles. We kind of touched on that just a minute ago, but now it's time to really delve into it. Mindy, tell us about it.
Okay, the Micro-Quilter actually has HQ micro handles that are made specifically for our machines.
The Micro-Quilter?
Sorry, no, not the Micro-Quilter. They have integrated finger touch controls that are just like your handlebar controls, and they also have an extra LED light that shines on the needle area.
More light is always better, isn't it?
Yes. Okay, so how do you use the HQ micro handles ergonomically? It's best if you sit, so if you can find a stool for yourself, a nice comfortable stool, You can sit it at the appropriate height so that you can avoid shoulder strain. And you notice how in this picture she's resting her elbows on the poles, and that's so that she's taking less weight off of her shoulder area. So how can you adjust your HQ micro handles? You can adjust those forward and backward by loosening the hex screw in the bracket. There's one at the top and one at the bottom. And they can be adjusted up and down by loosening the star knob and moving them to the appropriate height for you.
Now the Fusion comes already with the bracket built in the casting, but the Avante and the 16 will come with a bracket that you actually take off your handles and you attach the bracket to, and then put your handles back on, and then this screws into it.
Great, thank you. Sometimes it's good to set the handles close to the needle. And sometimes it's good to set them further away from the needle.
And why?
It's personal preference.
Oh, back to that Queen of the Quilter, huh?
That's right.
Okay.
It can be helpful to swing the HQ micro handles up high enough to clear the front poles. And some people actually like to use the micro handles for quilting all the time, so this is especially important for them to remember.
Okay, I'm going to go back to this previous one here, and then the previous one before, and just look at these. I have a friend that actually puts her ruler base on, and she puts this down so it's almost touching her fabric. So you lower it down, and then she puts her hands, drapes her hands over the handle, and uses the ruler base for more stability as she moves around on her fabric. I personally put my hands out on these outside corners, and I use my little pinky on the fabric for stability. So you've kind of, you can kind of get a feel of what works best for you.
Great, thanks, Vicki. Those are great tips. So we recommend our HQ micro handles for micro stippling or other tiny fill patterns. So we say if you can draw it big, you can quilt it small. And like I said before, some quilters prefer using these for all of their quilting. Here are some examples of some microfill patterns that we've done.
If you can draw it big, you can quilt it small. If you can quilt it big, you can quilt it small.
That's right.
Most of these you could quilt large, couldn't you?
Yep. So what kind of thread is recommended for micro-quilting? Think skinny. So 50 weight to 100, number 100. Bottom line, so fine, metallic and glitter, monofilament, both the poly and the nylon, and silk threads are all great.
One question before we move on here. There was a question about what do you use in your bobbin to go along with this when you're using those lightweight threads. And I would use, like if it's a monofilament, I would use either a poly or a cotton bobbin. I would not put monofilament in my bobbin. If you do want to put monofilament, then you want to slow your bobbin winder down, go really slow so that it doesn't stretch or destroy your bobbin.
Great, thanks.
Oh, I forgot the colors. I would match the color with the thread on the top. If I'm using monofilament, I would match the color with the fabric on the top.
Okay, yeah. So you can look in these two pictures, and we have one picture that shows you no micro-quilting, and then the second picture shows you the micro-quilting, and you can see how it makes the motif pop. Any of those fillers would work. So why should you take the time to do the micro-quilting? Well, it can be used to subdivide and add definition to the quilting, like in this Not So Plain Jane quilt by Lisa Kaye. This is part of our Handi Quilter collection. And you can see as you look at that quilt how she's subdivided the quilt with the feathers and the micro-quilting.
Okay, a couple of questions we want to clarify. Can the micro handles be swung up out of the way for other quilting? If I'm doing other quilting and using my main handles, I take my micro handles off. I don't have them on, especially if you're doing ruler work. micro handles would be in the way. The other question is, did you say with the Avante that the main handle set has to be removed to make way for the micro handles? You take the main handle set off, you put the bracket on, and you put your main handle set back on. They have to be on to have the micro handles and to use them, because that's what holds them in place.
And we have a few people who are wondering if they're going to be able to view this webinar later, and this webinar is being recorded and will be on the Handi Quilter website. So any of you that have to leave or don't have time to write everything down that you wish to, it will be on the website for you.
Thank you, Mindy.
Sure.
We are talking kind of fast, are we?
Yep, we are. Okay, so where can you learn more about micro-quilting? We're glad you asked. We actually have a DVD on micro-quilting, and it will walk you through all the steps and show you the different patterns that you can do. And by the way, we have more educational DVDs on handiquilter.com. They're like taking home the HQ Studio educators with you.
Okay, if you want to learn more about quilting, about our HQ University, go on to our website, handiquilter.com, retreats, to see the schedule and to register. Everything you've learned here today, you can come and learn more, and come and visit us in Salt Lake. Or you can buy those DVDs. You can take the quilter home with you. You don't have to dust your house. You can just quilt. You don't have to get dressed. You can just continue quilting. But we would love to have you join us again. And our next webinar is on April the 12th at 11 a.m. on marking the quilt. Thank you for joining us today. We will see you in a month.